Welcome to our shir, Parshas Rabbi, Tavshin Pei Aleph. And we can hear the Pamonim of El coming. Tomorrow is going to be Rosh Chodesh benching, Sunday is going to be Rosh Chodesh, and it's time to start thinking globally, to think how we're going to prepare ourselves to Yom Royim. So in that spirit, I'd like to make two ha'aras about how we can go to life. And it's all going to come from the very first pasuk. It says, Re'ei anoichi nois lifnechem yom bracha klala, and then es habracha asher tishmun, va'klala im lo tishmun. So I'd like to first start on the words Re'ei anoichi nois lifnechem yom. Dr. Abraham Tversky, Zechron Livracha, in one of his books talks about how we used to talk to drug addicts. And he would ask them the following question. He would say, let's say I would give to you a very big gift. And I would give to you a car, a beautiful luxury car. He says, for example, a Porsche, a red Porsche. And you could start driving it, and you would be so excited by it. So I want to ask you a question. You're driving down the street, you're going, and there's a parking space, but it's a little tight, you know how parking spaces are, and you can't really fit into it so well. If you're perfect, you'll make it by 1 inch on each side, and if you don't, you could scratch it a little bit. Would you park in that space, or would you keep going? So he said, Rabbi, listen, I'm not Meshug, I might be drug addict, I'm not crazy. Of course I'm going to keep going. To risk this beautiful luxury Porsche, I'm going to scratch it? Are you crazy? I'm not going to do that. So he said, okay, I understand that. So let me ask you a question. Do you believe that your body is a very precious thing? So they go, yeah, of course. So he says, so why would you harm it by doing drugs? You know that doing drugs is harmful to your body. And they'd say, yes. So why would you harm it? And they looked at him and they didn't have what to answer. So he says, I'll tell you why. The reason is because you value the Porsche as very valuable, but you don't value yourself. You don't have self-esteem. You don't feel that you're chashuv, that you're an important person. So he said, you know something, Rabbi, it's true. Ever since I was a kid, I just always felt I've been garnished. I didn't have anything going for me. I didn't do so well in school. I had all sorts of social issues. What can I tell you? So he said, that's the problem. He says, you have to understand that in Hashem's eyes, you are so chashuv. He says, Banim atem la'Hashem l'keichem. You're like children to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Life's is going to do. You can't scratch yourself. You can't harm your body. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants your body to be beautiful and whole. You're chashuv like a red Porsche. And you shouldn't harm that body. And if you took that attitude that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved you and you have value, you would have a whole different look in life. And you would not be turned to drugs to find that self-esteem that you don't find otherwise. We all say that Chaviv, that we're all considered HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creations. And if we look at that, we can see ourselves in a different way, and we'll act in a different way. And we'll value ourselves. And he says that's really a problem that many people have, is the problem that they don't see themselves as being a person of value, a person of worth. But by understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says, Chaviv atem l'Hashem l'keichem, banim atem l'Hashem l'keichem. You're chaviv, you're precious in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you have that self-esteem, you'll have a whole different life, a much more valuable life. So I was thinking, we come here and we have we're told you can have bracha and you can have klolo. Hashem's giving you choices, right? Like Chaim v'Amavis, we're also going to have. How do you make a decision? How do you know how to choose? And the answer is that a person with low self-esteem, a person who's depressed, he's not going to choose bracha. He can end up with klala, Rahman al-Islam. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us in this pasuk, I'm going to give you the tools in order to be able to survive, to be able to choose bracha, not to choose klala. Re'ei, see, anoichi nois lifnechem hayom. I'm giving you the power of anoichi, the power of being myself. There's a difference between the word ani and anoichi. Ani means I guess with a small I. Anoichi is with a big I. Anoichi Hashem l'kecha. But each of us have to look at ourselves as anoichi also. We also have value. And if we have value, we're going to be able to choose bracha, not klala. So re'ei, anoichi nois lifnechem hayom. I'm going to give you that anoichi, And then you're going to have bracha and klola, and then you're going to take bracha, because you're going to understand the importance, because you're going to look at it as somebody who's going to have bracha, and not Rahman al-Islan, chas v'sholom, to choose klola. Yesterday, I had the schus of attending a levaya from an Isha Chashuva. Her name was Rivka Eva Rand. She's the mother of the well-known Dr. Faye Zakheim, the head of the United Task Force for Family and Children, of which Agudas Yisrael is proud to be a member, and I attend on their behalf, which has 40 agencies that deal with social service, mental health, that help people and help Yidden. And her mother was Nifter, and I went to the Levaya. She was a 93-year-old person who had survived through the Holocaust. And how she came through it, and how she was afterwards, which was very much the focus of the Levaya. And they talked about how she was eternally happy. She was always chipper. She was always looking at the bright side. She was looking at the good side of things. And they were talking about how during the war, when she talked about her zichronos of the war, it was an amazing thing to hear how she looked at it. And they told a number of stories. They told many stories, and all of them went into the same place. And I'd like to just mention a couple of those stories that give us an idea. And with that, I'd like to perhaps explain a Maimer Chazal. It says that she was in a labor camp, Mauthausen, and she was talking about how they would be on, when they went there, and the same story happened, the exact same nusach, when she was in a labor camp. And they asked her, Yankel said, what was it like? So she says, it was up in the mountains. The air was unbelievable. It was so fresh and beautiful. To see the sun rise in the morning was just an incredible thing. It was so beautiful. And he was like stunned. That's what you remember of a concentration camp, a slave labor camp? She was 16 years old at the time. She goes, yeah, that's what was important to me. She talked another time when she was where they stayed, when the barracks was on one side, it was in Vienna, on one side of the Danube River, which is very beautiful. And on the other side was the factory they went to. And every morning they would march at dawn to the factory. And she says, what I remember is how beautiful it was to walk across the Danube River at sunup, at sunrise, and see the sun over the water. It was just incredible. And her Einikel says he couldn't believe it. Here she went through the horrors of the war, and what she saw was to remember the beauty of Hashem's creation. She said that one time she was walking along, and the way she put it, a window opened, and a Nazi woman was standing inside, and she opened the window, and she threw out at her a bag full of food. And another time, the same Nazi woman, is the way she called her, threw out her bag of clothing. And that's one of the ways she was able to survive the war. And her Einikel asked her, but why did she choose you? Obviously, you called her a Nazi woman. She wasn't a nice lady. So why'd she choose you? She said, well, I don't know. When I walked by the window, I smiled at her. And that made all the difference. And there was a little bit of Rahmanis that opened up because she smiled at her, because she had that. And the last story that made a Roshim, and there were many more, and we don't have time, but she said that her son took her to showing a fiddler on the roof. Fiddler on the Roof, if anyone's familiar, was a movie, I think, or a play. I think it was a play on Broadway. And it talked about the shtetl in Europe, you know, the famous "If I Were a Rich Man," and it ended with all of the Yidden being thrown out of the city. And you see them being, you know, the local Pailusha threw them out, and they're walking, they're crying, and they're carrying all their things and so on. And everybody's crying in the theater, and he says he was crying too. This her son said over, and he was crying, and they're all crying. And she was laughing. And she comes out of the theater and says, Mama, how could you laugh? And she says, Oy, if the Nazis has thrown us out of the city and we went to America, like all those people end up in America, oh yeah, wouldn't they have to go through that Gehenna that we went through? Halavai, we should have been thrown out. She was able to see in the Yidden being thrown out of that shtetl, that saved all their lives. All of the people who ended up in Siberia, they didn't know it, but that saved their lives. So what they thought was the worst thing in the world, she saw in it the silver lining, and she said, "Oy, Levi, we should have been thrown out by the Nazis." And I saw a statistic that Kristallnacht saved hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives. Because until then, they all thought they would make it through the war. They make it through they didn't know about the war, but they would make it. Eventually Hitler would be thrown out of office. He was a Meshuggah. Everyone thought he was a tight Meshuggah. How can this person be a leader? And they'll get rid of him. People come to their senses. When Kristallnacht happened, they saw this is real. There's no way they're staying. They're not going to tough it out. And hundreds of thousands left. At that time, they were letting them leave. They wanted them to leave. And people left and they saved their lives. So who knows? When things happen, we told often the story of my Zayda, who left. There was a question who should be the Rav of Azharov, and he left not to make a machlokes, and he was saved, and the person was not, and we don't know. So she said they talked about all the time how, despite all of the things that happened to her throughout her life, she always saw the good. She always saw the happiness. And her son said she wasn't delusional. And this is what I like to talk about. So there's a Gemara in the end of Makkas, a famous Gemara, Makkas Dov Chaf Daled Amud Beis, and it tells the story of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was walking together with Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azari, and they were walking together. And there's two stories. One where they came to Rome, and the more famous, I think, is they came to the site of the Beis Hamikdash, and they saw a fox running out from the Beis Hamikdash, and they all started to cry. And Rabbi Akiva, it says, Rabbi Akiva laughed. So they looked at him in astonishment. Said, Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? He said, why are you crying? So he said, because the Beis Hamikdash, where the Kohanim used to walk, where the Kedusha and the Shechina was there, and the Kodesh Kedoshim and Yom Kippur, a fox goes in it? Oh, what a terrible thing, how can we not cry? And Rabbi Akiva says, and I look at the Nevuah that says of Zechariah, that says that this is a simon that in the future it's going to be rebuilt. How could I not laugh? And the Gemara's Pella Tzuma. You know, these were all Gedolei Yisrael. Was it so fundamental, they looked at it so differently, that he saw and they saw it this way? So I think from these stories, I'd like to say no. And that'll get us back to our parsha. Is that really, Be'emerson, Rabbi Akiva understood, and Rabbi Akiva cried for the Beis Hamikdash too. But he saw, and what they did was the proper reaction. They cried. But Rabbi Akiva saw that if we're only going to cry, we're not going to be able to function. We're not going to be able to go weiter in life. We're just going to be so focused on the doom and the dismal and the anti-Semitism and all the things, sorrows, we're not going to get anywhere. So we have to make a conscious decision that while we acknowledge it was there, we're going to also look at the other side. We're going to look at the happy side. We're going to look at the side of hope, and the side of a future, and the side of accomplishment, not just the side of doom, without denying it, without saying it didn't happen. So of course Rabbi Akiva cried too, and of course the Chachamim cried. Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi say, we can't only cry. We have to also look at the positive side, that this is going to be the nevuah of Zechariah, that there's going to be a future, that the boys and the girls and the Zakenim and the Zakenos are going to be Yerushalayim. It's going to be beautiful. There's going to be future. We have to look at that too. And I think that's what, we go back to Mrs. Rand, is that's what she understood. She knew it was Gehenna. She didn't think that the Holocaust was a picnic. She understood how horrible it was. But she made a decision that I'm going to look at the good side of life. I'm going to live a full life. And I want to tell you something, I think that was, by so many of the survivors, they made that decision. Remember, as a child growing up, I didn't see a depression amongst them. Most of my friends' parents were survivors, and I spent many hours in their houses. They were like regular people. And I'm sure they all went through the Gehenna. But they made a decision that we're going to acknowledge it. And believe me, when there's a bar mitzvah, as we've spoken, tears flowed and everyone cried and everybody acknowledged it, and we went around with candles. But at the same time, they said we have to go on. We have to live life. We have to be b'charta b'chaim. So I'd like to say, he said that the Bnei Yissaschar says a pshat. When it says, Es ha-bracha asher tishmun, ve'aklolin lo tishmun. If you take a look, bracha, it says, Es ha-bracha, and by klol, it says, v'haklola. Doesn't say v'es haklola. Why? Zok the Bnei Yissaschar, who they were Einukot Bnei Yissaschar. So Bnei Yissaschar says, es we always know means inclusive. Es is the words Aleph Tov, right? From Aleph Biz Tov, from the first letter to the last letter. So when it says es before a word, it means to include more than the word itself, to include the fullness of the word. So the es ha-bracha, bracha, we want to be full, we want to be complete, everything. V'haklola, whatever we've got to have, not more. That's Azed Zok Bnei Yissaschar. I'd like to say, perhaps, according to what we're saying, another pshat, that a person goes through life, and there's nobody's life that doesn't have an bracha and klola. You know, and sometimes, you know, in the same day, a person can hear a basura taiva and a basura ra, and both are part of his life. But where's he going to put the dogish? And I was thinking, sometimes a person you're sitting at work, right, and somebody gives you a nice compliment, and you feel good. So you feel good, and for about 10 seconds you feel good, and then you go on. When somebody says something schlecht to you, you brood on it the whole day, and you don't sleep at night, and you're all upset, right? Why is that? Because we're focused on the klola side a lot. We're focused on the mother's side, and the lesson we're learning from Akiva. The lesson we're learning is we have to try and focus on the good side, right? To try and focus on the bracha side, focus on the chaim side. So I think that's what it says. I'm giving you bracha and klola. It's going to be your life. It's going to have both. That's life. Everybody's life has both. That's a bracha shetishmun. But the esa bracha, put most of your life, put your aleph biz tov in focusing on the bracha part of it. That klola, deal with the klola. You can't ignore it. It's there. It's real. But deal with it and not let it overwhelm you, not let it become something that stifles your entire life, that takes over from you. That's what you have to do, and that's, I think, what the Pasuk is telling us. And this thing that we can change, this is life-changing. Just like we said in the beginning of the shir, we talked about from Dr. Tursky, we talked about the self-esteem that a person has to have. They have to feel an anoichi sense of, I'm here, right? Eved Avram anoichi, right? Not Eved Avram, Eved Avram, somebody chashuv, right? And all the time people say anoichi, you have to have that sense of self. In the same way, when you have a choice of focusing on the bracha and focusing on the klola, V'esa bracha, spend more of your time focusing on the bracha, and the klola you'll have to take care of as well. But it shouldn't overwhelm you, and it shouldn't become who you are. The bracha should be who you are, and the klola should be part of what you do, not who you are. So happiness is a very, very important thing. To be a person of happiness, to be a person who is able to do that, to come through something like a Holocaust, to come through the type of unfortunate sorrows that people have, and come out with a happiness, and people do it. It's all a decision. Everybody has bracha and everybody has kol. What they focus on is up to them. So I think if a person focuses on the bracha, focuses on the chaim, they'll have a happier life. They'll be able to accomplish more. Because when you're in a good mood, you can accomplish more than when you're in a bad mood and you don't feel like accomplishing anything. So the advice that the Torah is giving us is be happy, choose bracha. You'll be glad you did. Good Shabbos.